What happens when a black CEO, calm as the sky before a storm, boards a flight she paid full price for only to be told, "You don't belong here." Would she raise her voice, storm out, or would she silently dismantle an entire system with just one phone call? This is not just a story about a denied seat. It's about Eden Blake, a woman who climbed her way to the top, only to face the same walls she's been tearing down her whole life. What would you do if your name was erased from the list deliberately? What if someone tore up your boarding pass in front of a full cabin? Would you shrink, or would you rise? This story unfolds 30,000 feet above the ground, but its impact reaches deep into every boardroom, every airport terminal, every heart that's ever been told they're not enough. Buckle in, because this isn't just turbulence, it's transformation. This is the story of how one woman grounded an entire airline not with rage, but with resolve. If stories of justice, power, and dignity matter to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. Eden Blake walked through the glass-paneled terminal of Larkhill International with the silent assurance of someone who had paid her dues over and over again. The soft click of her heels on polished granite echoed like punctuation behind her. Deliberate and firm. At 42, she had no need to prove her presence. Her resume did that for her. CEO of Novartis Dynamics, architect of 3 Fortune 500 mergers, daughter of a single mother who once cleaned these very airport floors on the night shift. But today was not about memory. Today was about forward motion. She approached the boarding gate for Flight 918 to Santa Ynez, eyes steady on the destination. The final board meeting to close a $3.4 billion merger with Ventro Air loomed ahead. Eden had spent the last 18 months navigating the razor-thin tightrope between deal and disaster. The stakes were no longer just financial, they were cultural, structural, personal. A gentle voice broke her stride. "Good morning, Ms. Blake," said the gate agent with a professional smile. "We've already processed your mobile check-in. You're in 2A, first class." Eden nodded. "Thank you." She tucked her phone into her leather portfolio and stepped onto the jet bridge. The familiar scent of air travel-filtered air, recirculated ambition, faint traces of jet fuel wrapped around her. This was not her first cross-country negotiation flight, but something about today carried weight. Not nerves, not fear, but a charged quiet, the kind of stillness before a wave crests. She entered the first-class cabin and paused. Cream leather seats, satin headrest covers, individual lighting halos that curved softly over each seat like a promise. The flight attendant near the galley gave a practiced nod and smile. No name offered, just the subtle survey of her attire-tailored gray pantsuit, understated pearl earrings, hair swept into a clean bun. No fanfare, but not invisible either. Not quite. Eden stepped toward 2A. That's when she saw him. A man, middle-aged, flushed from hurrying, in a crumpled blazer was seated in her assigned seat, legs crossed, already sipping a mimosa, the kind offered pre-flight to first-class passengers. She slowed, blinked once, then glanced at the brass plate above the seat 2A. No mistake. Before she could speak, a voice approached from behind. "Excuse me, ma'am," came the clipped tone of a flight attendant, Darren Knox, per his name tag, though his voice carried more rank than hospitality. "I need to see your boarding pass." Eden's brows lifted slightly. Is there an issue he didn't answer? Just scanned her phone without eye contact. His scanner beeped once. He squinted at the screen. Looks like you've been reassigned. You're in 21F now. Equipment change, he said. No apology, no explanation. Eden's stomach did not drop, but something tightened like a drawstring pulling at the lining of her chest. That seat is first class, she said calmly, pointing to the screen. It's on my app. It's on my confirmation from last night. From your airline. Darren tapped the device again. Yes, but due to the aircraft change, some passengers were moved. First class on this aircraft only has 4 seats, and you chose to move me. He looked up for the first time. Ma'am, this wasn't personal. It's how the system auto-populates the new manifest. Her lips curved into a polite, practiced line, one she had worn in boardrooms where she was the only woman, or the only black person. Often both. Who else was moved? A pause. That's not information I can disclose. Of course not. She nodded slowly, a small breath leaving her lungs. Behind her, she could feel a ripple. The woman in 1C watching, a businessman 2 rows back shifting in his seat. The quietness of observers who didn't want to be seen observing. Would you like assistance finding 21F? Darren asked, more to end the conversation than to offer help. No, Eden said. I know how to walk. And so she did, past the first-class cabin, past the curtain that now might as well have been a wall, into the narrow corridor of Economy Plus where rows grew tighter, legroom shrank, and the world felt one size smaller. 21F was a window seat, near the rear galley, next to a young man with over-ear headphones and a skateboard stowed beneath the seat in front of him. He looked up, startled, then moved to give her space. Sorry, he said, as if it was his fault. It's fine, Eden replied. She sat. The seat groaned beneath her, not from weight, but from protest. The armrest pinched her hips. The tray table wobbled. The aura of entitlement that often sat in first class was absent here, but in its place was something quieter, understanding, and perhaps discomfort too. She looked at the mimosas being passed behind the curtain. She thought of the man sipping from her seat, and she thought of how easy it had been to erase her, in her lap. The phone buzzed a calendar alert, Final Acquisition Review 6, AR Venturo Air Headquarters, Santa Ynez. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then, slowly, she swiped it away. Not yet, not like this. The hum of the engines grew steadier as boarding neared completion. Eden Blake sat in seat 21F, spine upright, arms resting gently on the trembling tray table. Outside the small oval window, baggage handlers waved orange batons with mechanical rhythm. But inside the cabin, her world was still. She had not said a word since sitting down. The man beside her, young, polite, wearing a university hoodie, stole side glances now and then, as if trying to place her. Eventually, he dared to speak. You were supposed to be up front. Right. She turned toward him, the hint of a smile not quite reaching her eyes. Yes. That sucks. Yes, she said again, quieter. There was no need to dramatize it. Not yet. But Eden's mind was already doing what it had been trained to do, assess, verify, and build a plan. She opened her phone. The digital boarding pass still glowed with 2A, first class. She took a screenshot and saved it. Then she tapped open her encrypted business app and sent a single line to her general counsel. Rowan Quinn, I've been bumped. Need passenger manifest from last night and today. Internal logs if you can pull them quietly. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. A moment later, understood. Working on it. She turned off the screen and exhaled slowly. The seatbelt sign dinged above her. A flight attendant passed by Lena Park, based on the gold tag pinned to her vest. She stopped momentarily at Eden's row, gaze softening with recognition. "Ms. Blake," she said gently, bending to eye level. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry about the mix-up. We were told it was an automated receipt, but..." She didn't finish, but someone made a decision. Uden offered. Lena nodded slowly. "Yes." Eden met her gaze. It was a rare thing, apology without shame, empathy without pity. She appreciated it more than she expected. "Thank you, Lena." The woman straightened, gave the smallest bow of the head, and continued down the aisle. Beside Eden, the young man pulled off his headphones. "Sorry to eavesdrop, but are you someone important?" The question hung there, not rude, just raw. Eden smiled. "Depends on who's asking." He blushed. "Sorry, I didn't mean..." "No," she interrupted gently. "It's a fair question. Yes, I'm the CEO of a company, a pretty large one, but today, I'm just someone who lost her seat." He chuckled nervously. "Well, whoever took it better hope you don't own the airline." Eden blinked once. "Not yet," she said. The plane pushed back from the gate. Engines whirred louder, cabin lights dimmed for takeoff. She glanced back at the curtain dividing first class from the rest of the aircraft. It rippled once like a veil over something sacred, or off-limits. Her chest tightened. The injustice wasn't new. What stung was how subtle it had been. No loud denial, no overt slur, just a clean reprint of hierarchy, and a quiet command to move along. But Eden Blake didn't move along. Not anymore. She had spent years being told to wait, to understand, to pick her battles. And still, she had climbed. From a childhood apartment above a laundromat in East Lowell to a penthouse office overlooking Manhattan. Every step forward had come with a price tag and a story. This would be another, but not just a story of endurance, a story of consequence. She reopened her phone and typed a new note, this time to Celeste Moran, her public affairs director. Prep-controlled messaging draft. Use coded language for now. Situation evolving. Celeste's reply came quickly. Understood. We'll watch live logs for crew names, timestamps, and internal comms. Aiden glanced once more toward the curtain. She pictured the man in her seat, Darren Knox, standing there, scanning someone else's pass with polite indifference, the thin veil of professionalism wrapped over a quiet insult. And yet, she didn't feel rage, she felt focus. As the plane climbed into the clouds, Eden sank into the stiff seat of 21F, pulled out her tablet, and began a new file, titled Chain of Accountability. She wasn't sure where the first sentence would begin, but she knew how the last one would end. The hum of the plane at cruising altitude was almost hypnotic. The overhead lights had dimmed to a soft amber, and around Eden Blake, the passengers of Economy Plus were slipping into their respective routines magazines, headphones, podcasts, yawns. But Aiden wasn't unwinding. She sat upright, stylus in hand, notes scattered across her tablet like a courtroom strategy board. She had just reread the passenger manifest that Rowan Quinn had covertly forwarded. On the screen were names, assignments, timestamps, and, just as she suspected her original seat, 2A, had been transferred at 5:42 a.m., exactly 26 minutes before boarding. No randomized algorithm, no blanket reshuffle, just a single, deliberate override. The name now attached to 2A Clint Ashford. Not an elite status holder, not a medical necessity, not a last-minute switch due to mechanical error, just a mid-tier investor and member of Venturo Air's legacy board. A man Eden had seen in dozens of industry rooms, but had never once shaken hands with. She remembered his expression at last year's aviation finance conference, vaguely amused, vaguely dismissive. Now he was sipping champagne in her seat. Eden tapped the side of her stylus against the tray table. Twice. It was an old habit, one her mentor used to call her thinking metronome. She didn't need confirmation. She needed a decision. She pulled up her encrypted voice recorder and began quietly speaking. 5:42 a.m., manual override, no system-wide change, seat 2A reassigned to Clint Ashford, confirmed no illness, no rebooking, intention likely political, not logistical. Darren Knox executed reassignment. Lena Park confirmed non-random, recommend escalation. She paused, saved the file, and sent it immediately to Rowan with the subject documented intent. Begin contingency B. Across the aisle, a flight attendant in his late 20s, shaved head, smart uniform, nervous eyes hovered with a drinks tray. He offered her a warm smile. Still or sparklin', ma'am. Still, thank you, she said, her voice even but absent. As she reached for the glass, she felt his hesitation. I just wanted to say, he stammered. I saw what happened at Borden. That wasn't right. She looked up, registering his sincerity. What's your name? She asked gently. Connor Bishop, he replied, adjusting the tray in his hands. Thank you for saying something, Connor. That alone means a lot. He gave her a quick nod, cheeks flushed, then moved on. For a fleeting moment, Eden allowed herself to feel the impact. These little cracks in the wall, the ones that formed when people dared to acknowledge what others ignored. That was how systems began to break, one moment of discomfort at a time. But discomfort alone wasn't enough. Not when humiliation wore a navy blazer and scanned barcodes for a living. Eden flipped open her notebook and wrote a phrase that would anchor the next decision. It's not just a reassignment, it's a test of silence. Then she drafted a single paragraph to Celeste Morin. Begin media draft. We don't publish yet, but prep a whistleblower version, an executive integrity version, and a DEI-centered version. Title, When Silence is Policy. We may need all three. Below that, she added a bullet point. Confirm if Clint Ashford was briefed about the reassignment. Her fingers hesitated before tapping sent for a flicker of a moment. She wondered, was this overkill? Was she reaching for a hammer when diplomacy might suffice? But then she remembered the way Darren Knox had smiled while saying her new seat was in 21F. That barely contained delight, the glint of control behind procedure, and she remembered all the young professionals watching her, the black women, the daughters of immigrants, the quietly resilient souls who had read her story in Forbes or followed her rise on LinkedIn and believed, if Eden made it, maybe so could I. No, this was not about ego. This was about precedent. She hit send. Hours later, turbulence rocked the cabin gently enough for people to reach for seat belts, enough for coffee to ripple in cups. Eden barely noticed. She was reading the preliminary analysis from Rowan. System admin ID, Knox 2741, logged in from Larkhill Admin Ops Center, executed seat override at 5:42 a.m., following a 3-minute call with an unlogged private number. We're still tracing the number. Eden stared at that sentence, her jaw tensed. A 3-minute call, followed by a single action that set this entire spiral in motion. She didn't need to guess who was on the other end of that call. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about the kind of culture that let a seat be reassigned for reasons no one would admit on record. She looked out the window. A cloudless stretch of sky framed her reflection in the glass. She studied her face for a moment, poised, but beneath that, tired, the kind of tired that didn't come from red-eye flights or acquisition battles. This was a bone-deep fatigue that came from being tested over and over, being told you had a seat at the table until someone decided to pull it away, and Eden had stopped accepting that long ago. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded strip of the original boarding pass ripped by Darren Knox just after scanning it at the gate. She had scooped the pieces off the floor without a word. A talisman, a receipt of erasure. Now, she smoothed it gently on the tray table and traced its edge with her finger. "You can tear the paper," she whispered under her breath, but not the person who carried it. She placed the piece back in her bag and opened a new document on her tablet: Emergency Protocol Stakeholder Rights, Breach and Response Framework. Drafting immediate grounds for operational audit. She wasn't just writing for herself anymore. She was writing the preamble to a reckoning. Eden Blake didn't hear the first PA chime. She was lost in the rhythms of her thoughts, hands gliding across her tablet as she edited the final paragraphs of the emergency response draft. Her stylus paused only when the intercom clicked again, louder this time, with a mild tremor in the flight attendant's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've just been informed of a minor systems issue. We'll be returning to the gate for a quick assessment. We ask that you remain calm and stay in your seats." Gasps and murmurs spread like static through the cabin. People twisted in their chairs, confused. Someone groaned audibly in row 19. A couple beside Eden whispered urgently in Spanish, exchanging nervous glances. But Eden didn't panic. She reached for her phone. Within seconds, a message from Rowan Quinn lit up her screen. "FAA pulled our signal. Flagged DK Knox override as violation of SOP. They want verification. Internal alarm triggered at Larkhill. Sit tight." The tremor beneath Eden's ribcage wasn't fear. It was ignition. The kind that surged through her veins in high-stakes boardrooms right before an acquisition tipped in her favor. A few rows behind, Connor Bishop approached quietly and knelt beside her seat, whispering, "Miss Blake, I don't know what you did, but something's happening. They're tense up front, like really tense." Eden turned her eyes to him, steady and clear. "I reported a breach," she said calmly. "They're verifying whether Venturo's internal systems are compromised." Connor blinked. "Are they?" "They are," Eden replied, "and that's not the only thing." He swallowed hard, looking over his shoulder. "You want anything from up front?" "Just one thing," she said, then added softly, "respect." He nodded and slipped back up the aisle, his Navy uniform disappearing into the uncertain hum of mid-air protocol. The plane had begun its slow arc back toward the terminal. Passengers were anxious now, whispers about missed connections, interviews, family reunions. A woman clutched a tiny dog in a carrier, her knuckles white. But Aiden sat still, almost contemplative, as if she were gathering herself before walking into a courtroom. In many ways, she was. When the plane docked, the door hissed open and the walkway reconnected with a practiced thud. A new figure stepped onto the aircraft, a tall man in a slate-gray suit with a Venturo lanyard clipped to his collar. Mitchell Crane, Director of Operations. Eden recognized him instantly. Polished, diplomatic, excellent at saying nothing with a smile. He made his way down the aisle with the artificial calm of someone sent to contain rather than resolve. When he reached 14C, he leaned in slightly, not quite meeting her eyes. "Ms. Blake, would you mind stepping off with me for a brief conversation?" The cabin grew unnaturally still. Eden blinked slowly, her features unreadable. "Am I being removed from the flight?" "No, of course not," Mitchell said, hands up, palms outward like peace flags. "We just need a quick word privately. To clarify some inconsistencies in our internal system." "System inconsistencies," she echoed. "Interesting that they only emerge when a black woman challenges protocol." Mitchell hesitated. "Please," he said, a shade more quietly. "We'd prefer not to make a scene." "Then you shouldn't have created one," she replied, and stood. As she gathered her bag, several passengers turned toward her, not in confusion, but in solidarity. Connor offered a half-smile from the galley, eyes darting between her and Mitchell. A teenage girl across the aisle mouthed the words, "Thank you." With measured steps, Eden followed Mitchell into the jet bridge. The room they ushered her into was sterile beige walls, a round metal table, 2 cups of stale coffee sweating in their lids. Across from her sat a woman in her late 40s, sharp-eyed and tense, Clara Redmond, VP of Risk and Compliance. Eden knew her reputation discreet, loyal to the executive team, lethal with NDAs. "We need to understand your intentions," Clara began. "Your report was escalated to the FAA. That's highly irregular for a passenger complaint." "I didn't submit a complaint," Eden corrected. "I submitted a breach." Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Clara leaned in. "You're not just a CEO. Ms. Blake, you're a public figure. You understand the implications of triggering regulatory oversight, the damage this could do to investor confidence, operational flow. To quote your own employee," Eden cut in, "let her taste what the rest of us endure." The room went silent. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. Eden slid her tablet across the table. Audio file, time-stamped logs, overridden seat assignment tied to a call made from your overnight ops center. Darren Knox manually reassigned me, then tore up my boarding pass. You know how long I've been flying with Venturo, 12 years. Not one incident until today, and it wasn't an error. It was retaliation. Mitchell took a breath, visibly flustered. "You have to understand. Carl, Knox, he doesn't represent our values." "Then prove it," Eden said, cutting through his apology. "Publicly." She stood. "I'm going to return to my seat now, and I'll wait for your internal response. But make no mistake, this doesn't end at the gate." Neither of them replied. As she opened the door, Clara finally said, "Ms. Blake, please consider the broader implications, the media, the market, the story this tells." Eden turned back, hand on the frame. "That's exactly what I'm doing." Back at 14C, passengers glanced up as she re-entered. No one spoke, but the air felt different, charged, expectant. Connor approached silently and placed a fresh glass of water on her tray. "No turbulence this time," he said with a small smile. Eden nodded. whispering, not the kind you feel in the air, anyway. Then she looked out the window. The plane hadn't even lifted off again, but she knew this story was already airborne as the plane taxied slowly back to the gate. Eden Blake kept her gaze fixed on the blur of airport lights outside the window. The engines had quieted to a low rumble like a sleeping animal, unaware it was about to be stirred. Connor Bishop passed through the aisle checking seat belts. His expression was taut now. Something had shifted in the crew. The tension was no longer just procedural. It had a pulse. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice returned, too measured to be casual. "We're experiencing a delay due to new directives from ground control. We appreciate your patience." A chorus of low groans and frustrated sighs rippled through the cabin. But Eden didn't blink, because her phone vibrated again just once. A single message from Rowan Quinn lit the screen. "FAA triggered internal investigation. Stand by. More turbulence coming, but this time, theirs." She set the phone face down on the tray table. Across from her, an older woman leaned forward from the aisle seat in 13D. She had silver-streaked hair, strong cheekbones, and a soft Midwestern accent. "Excuse me," she said, not unkindly. "I don't mean to intrude, but is everything all right?" Eden offered a half-smile. "Not quite, but it will be." The woman tilted her head. "You're someone important, aren't you?" "I'm just someone who got tired of being quiet," Eden replied. 20 minutes passed. The engines had gone silent. The cabin was growing restless. And then it happened. The curtain at the front of the plane parted again, and Darren Knox stepped through, his badge now turned inward, perhaps by accident, perhaps by design. His expression was steeled with control, but the fake polish couldn't hide the frayed nerves. He walked toward 14C with the stiff posture of someone walking into a courtroom instead of a cabin. Passengers stirred. A teenager with noise-canceling headphones lifted one ear to listen. A mother held her child's hand tighter. Even the pilots in the galley exchanged glances. Knox stopped beside her row. "Ms. Blake," he said. She looked up, calm. "Mr. Knox." "I've spoken with management," he said through slightly clenched teeth. "You'll be returned to your original seat in first class, effective immediately." There was a pause, half a beat too long. "And your boarding pass?" Eden asked softly. He reached into his pocket and produced a reprinted pass with seat 1A printed neatly across the top. No apology, no explanation, just a transaction. Eden rose slowly, steady and regal. She took the pass but didn't move right away. Instead, she turned to face the cabin, rows and rows of quiet strangers watching. "I know this has been an inconvenience for many of you," she said, voice carrying clearly, "but sometimes the only way to address injustice is to stop pretending it doesn't exist." The woman from 13D folded her hands and nodded silently. Aden continued. "This wasn't about a seat. It never was. It was about being seen, about what happens when those in power decide quietly and without warning that you don't belong where you've earned the right to be." A hush swept through the cabin like oxygen being pulled from the air. "And the next time someone tells you this kind of thing doesn't happen anymore." She raised the torn boarding pass from her pocket and held it between two fingers. "You can tell them you were here." Knox's jaw tightened. "We'd prefer if you'd return to your seat now." Eden smiled sharp and cool. "So would I." As she passed through the curtain into first class, heads turned. Even the suited man in 1B lowered his whiskey and nodded with a kind of reverence. She sat down slowly in her rightful seat, not just because it was 1A, but because the seat had, for a moment, become a symbol of all the places she'd fought to be and all the ways the world had tried to push her out. Connor appeared a moment later. "I brought you this," he said, offering a glass of chilled still water with a slice of lemon. No tray, no forced smile, just quiet dignity. "Thank you," Eden said. He leaned closer, almost a whisper. "You reminded us all of something today." "What's that?" she asked. "That silence isn't neutrality." She held his gaze for a moment. "And neutrality isn't safety." Outside, the sun had begun to set bruised orange over the horizon, smudged behind hangars and distant control towers. The plane had not yet taken off again. They were waiting for clearance. But Eden had already taken flight. In her mind, the reckoning had begun, and the ripple she had unleashed, one act of small rebellion turned into quiet revolution, was only beginning to reach the shore. By the time Eden Blake returned to her seat in the first class, Venturo Air's internal systems were already trembling beneath the surface. The aircraft remained docked at the gate, waiting for a revised flight clearance. Passengers texted loved ones, browsed menus, refreshed delay notifications with increasing impatience. But none of them knew what Eden's quiet action had set into motion. In a sealed server room beneath Venturo's operations center in Raleigh, North Carolina, a blinking series of alerts began compiling under a single event label, Priority Audit Triggered, 412B, Internal Passenger Discrepancy, Red Flag. At that exact moment, 30,000 feet above another part of the country, Rowan Quinn stood in the aisle of a private jet, laptop open, headset on, heart racing. He had been Eden's legal advisor for almost 8 years. He'd seen her navigate mergers, lawsuits, and hostile takeovers, but never something quite like this. "Download everything," Eden had said over the phone. "Passenger records, system overrides, manual edits, get me logs, get me timestamps. I want proof. Now." Staring at the data streams unraveling in real time, Rowan felt like he was watching the skeleton of a lie reveal itself. He clicked open a flagged file from the previous evening. User login, DW, Outnox action, manual, reassignment. Time, 04:37 a.m. EST, target Blake, E, seat 1A, seat 14C economy. Plus note, equipment, swap, justification override manually entered, justification override. That wasn't a glitch. That wasn't a last-minute seat shuffle. That was personal. Rowan inhaled deeply, bracing himself as he dialed, back on the plane. Eden sat motionless in 1A, the hum of air vents whispering above her. The glass of water in her hand was sweating slightly. Her other hand rested on the armrest, fingertips tracing a slow, contemplative circle on the leather. Her thoughts churned beneath her calm. What if this explodes? What if the board calls this insubordination? She had planned this acquisition for nearly 2 years. Venturo Air was a cornerstone deal for Airline Group. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here to finalize the merger, to usher in reforms, to protect legacy employees and modernize toxic systems. And yet, the way she had been demoted, no explanation, no eye contact. A torn boarding pass like a slap in front of a full cabin cut deeper than any boardroom slight. It was meant to humiliate her, and the worst part, it nearly worked. She reached into her bag, pulled out her notebook, and began to write not minutes or tasks, but a declaration. If the system cannot be trusted to self-correct, then it must be reprogrammed. Not with rage, but with clarity. Not with power, but with purpose. E. Blake. Eden. Rowan's voice crackled over her earbuds, cutting into her thoughts. I've got something. Actually, I've got a lot. She kept her voice low. Talk. Darren Knox manually reassigned your seat personally, not a system override. He typed it in. I have the log, time, badge, ID, IP. Eden exhaled slowly. You're sure? I'm looking at it right now, and there's more. A voice memo from a junior ops agent sent to me by accident, forwarded from internal chat. It's Knox bragging. Says something like, let's see how the Queen handles a little turbulence. Eden's jaw tightened. It wasn't just about her seat. It was about a culture, a sickness in the walls. And suddenly, she saw the outlines of a bigger plan, a review not just of her own treatment, but of every systemic bias hidden in the algorithms, overrides, and untraceable actions at Ventro Air. We act now, she said, reaching for her tablet. We don't wait for them to apologize. Already prepping a preliminary report. Rowan said, but Eden, be careful. This could trigger a full-on investigation. SEC, FAA, maybe more. Her voice dropped. Then let's give them something worth investigating. On the tarmac. Maintenance trucks idled. A second first officer entered the cockpit. From behind the curtain, Eden could hear a muted flurry of activity. Suddenly, a flight attendant, Connor Bishop, knelt beside her seat. He didn't speak at first, just placed a small folded slip of paper on her tray table. It was her original seat assignment slip, somehow salvaged. Below it, in tiny pen strokes, were words handwritten in sharp block lettering. We saw, we're sorry, some of us are with you. No signature, no badge number, but it was enough. She swallowed the burn in her throat. Not sadness, not weakness, just the unexpected weight of being seen. A few rows back, passengers refreshed news alerts, and then it began to spread. A headline popped up on two screens breaking CEO of Airline Group reports. Targeted downgrade on Flight 412, FAA launches internal review of Ventro Air in row. 16, a man whispered. Wait, is that her? The woman beside him murmured. She's the CEO, and they demoted her. She's the reason we're still on the ground. No, the older woman from 13D said firmly. She's the reason we're going to fly safe again. Eden closed her eyes and let the voices ripple around her. This was no longer about inconvenience, it was about reckoning. And Flight 4 and 12 hadn't even left the ground. It took only 26 minutes for the ripple to become a wave. By the time the aircraft doors sealed and Flight 412 began to taxi toward the runway, news of Eden Blake's report had already crossed from internal channels into the national conversation. Venturo Air's name now trended on social platforms under hashtags like Flight 112 Incident and Ya Blake Vaz Bias. In the last few minutes before takeoff, passengers on board leaned over tray tables, scrolling and whispering. She filed an official FAA report. I heard she grounded all future flights. This is going to blow up in 14C. Mason Doyle, a university student studying political science, typed furiously into his group chat. Guys, I'm literally on that flight. She's a CEO. They downgraded her. She just reported it live, and the airline tried to cover it up. I'm watching history. Back in 1A. Eden didn't react to the stares. She'd grown used to people looking through her or looking away. But now they looked directly at her, not with disdain, but with something like curiosity or awe. Still, her heart was a quiet battlefield. She felt the conflict in every breath. Had she done the right thing? Would this become a media circus? Would this be used to discredit her, paint her as angry, irrational, power-hungry? And yet, what if she had said nothing? What would that have taught every black girl in row 28, every employee watching, wondering if it was worth speaking up? Her mother's voice came to her then, soft and certain, like it always had on her hardest days. Silence never saved me. Speak even when they try to close the door. The plane shuddered into acceleration. Flight 4 and 12 rose off the ground. So did the reckoning. In a glass-walled office on the 18th floor of Venturo Air's headquarters in Raleigh, Chandler Whitaker, VP of Corporate Operations, barked into his headset. "You're telling me she has the boarding logs, the override file." His assistant's voice crackled through the line. "She has everything, sir. The logs, the time-stamped edits, and the voice memo, Darren's." Whitaker's throat constricted. "She went to the FAA, she did. The hotline report was confirmed. We have an FAA notice of investigation pending, and the media already running it. CNN just picked it up. It's not good." Whitaker turned to face the downtown skyline, his mind racing. This wasn't just bad PR. This was a full corporate crisis. He hadn't authorized the override, but he had ignored it. That made him complicit. If Eden exposed this, the entire executive tier could face audits, resignations, even criminal liability. He spun back to his desk. "Get me William Knox, now, at 37,000 feet." Eden opened her tablet and reread the FAA's confirmation email. Below it, she had a new draft queued for her team, subject urgent legal and compliance. "We need a full review of all passenger override incidents within Venturo Air over the last 24 months, pattern analysis, demographic mapping, and operator behavior reviews, priority level critical. Let's prepare for congressional scrutiny. E. Blake." She tapped send. Across the aisle, a white-haired woman in 2B leaned toward her. "I saw what happened earlier," the woman said softly, "and I just wanted to say, I've flown with this airline for 15 years. Never imagined they'd pull something like that." Eden nodded, offering a quiet, "Thank you." The woman hesitated. "What will you do?" Eden thought for a moment. "I'll finish what I started." 30 minutes later, the plane descended toward Miami International. Outside, ground crews scurried as news vans clustered at the terminal exit. Eden watched the blue sea of flashing lights through the window, her thoughts already several steps ahead. Inside the cabin, passengers packed up headphones and sighed into upright seats, but many stole glances toward Eden, like they were watching someone carry something weightier than luggage. When the plane taxied to a stop, Eden didn't move. She waited. Let everyone else rush. She had no reason to, except one. As the seatbelt light blinked off, Connor Bishop, the same flight attendant who had returned her boarding pass fragment earlier, approached her row. He knelt beside her again and whispered, "Ms. Blake, there's something else." She tilted her head slightly, alert. Connor pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. It was a printed staff memo. "To Flight Crew 412 from Corporate Ops, Raleigh subject passenger 1A, contain narrative. If asked, reiterate that the seat reassignment was a routine technical change. Do not comment on any perceived confrontation or passenger dissatisfaction. Below it, in highlighter, do not engage in discussion with passenger Eden Blake. Escalate immediately to gate supervisor. Eden read it once, then twice, then looked up at Connor. "You could get in trouble for this," she said. "I will," he replied, "but I won't be silent anymore." She stared at the words again. Contain narrative. This was no longer just a personal incident. It was a coordinated cover-up, and now she had the receipts. As the cabin doors opened, a rush of humid Miami air filled the front galley of Flight 412. Eden Blake remained seated, even as rows of passengers pushed into the aisle. Her fingers tapped a deliberate rhythm on her knee, calm above the surface. But below, her thoughts churned. Every step from this point on had to be precise, measured, unshakable. "Ms. Blake," came a voice from the front. It was Connor Bishop again. His tone now had an edge of urgency. "They're waiting for you just outside the jet bridge." She stood slowly, collecting her bag with quiet grace. The scrap of her torn boarding pass still tucked safely in her coat pocket. A fragment of injustice, now her personal compass. The moment she stepped into the narrow corridor, the dull roar of reporters burst into focus. "Ms. Blake, did Venturo Air discriminate against you? Is it true you filed with the FAA in mid-flight? Do you plan to sue the airline? What does this mean for the acquisition?" Cameras flashed. Microphones jutted forward like arrows. But Eden didn't flinch. She raised a hand gently, not to silence them, but to still the noise. "I'll speak," she said, "but not in a hallway." 30 minutes later, in a designated press lounge at Miami International, Eden stood before a podium hastily arranged by her team. Behind her, Rowan Quinn, her chief legal officer, scanned a stack of printed FAA reports and internal logs. Nina Talbot, Aerostar's head of communications, nodded to the tech crew. They were live. Eden adjusted the mic and began no teleprompter, no speech, just her. "When I boarded Flight 412 this morning," she said, "I did so as a passenger who'd paid for first class, as a black woman, as a CEO, as someone who has spent 2 decades earning respect that often came last if it came at all." The room stilled. Even the clicking of cameras paused. I was told there was an equipment change, that my seat was no longer available. But what was missing wasn't just a chair, it was transparency. It was truth. She took a breath, grounding herself in the emotion. I was reassigned not by error, but by intention. Downgraded through a manual override, a flight attendant tore my boarding pass in front of a full cabin, and when I asked for accountability, I was met with silence and then a cover-up. She held up the memo Connor had handed her earlier. The bold header read, "Contain narrative." This was not an isolated mistake. Aiden continued. It was a reflection of culture, one that deflects, denies, and diminishes rather than confronts its own failures. Murmurs filled the room. Reporters scrambled to tweet, record, publish, but this moment, this flight is an opportunity, she said, soft but clear. Not for vengeance, for reform. For every traveler who's ever been sidelined, profiled, or silenced. She stepped back from the mic. No drama, no raised voice, just impact. That afternoon, as the footage of Eden's statement circled online, Venturo Air's corporate office entered full crisis mode. Chandler Whitaker slammed the conference room door shut behind him. "She just called us out on live television. With receipts, William Knox, red-faced and tight-lipped, jabbed his finger at the table. This is political theater. We'll deny everything. Blame the override on an outdated system. No, came a voice from the end of the table. It was Rebecca Lynn, the airline's newly appointed director of compliance, a woman known for her silence in meetings until now. She has documents, audio, staff whistleblowers. If we deny this, we dig a deeper hole. And if we admit it, Knox snapped. Rebecca leveled her gaze. Then we begin the real work. Or we watch this airline sink. Chandler exhaled, already seeing the headlines stacking higher. The numbers weren't line flight cancellations up, stock price down. Their only way out was through. Later that evening, back at her hotel suite, Eden stood by the window overlooking Biscayne Bay. A glass of water sat untouched on the side table. Her phone buzzed with alerts, press inquiries, investor concerns, internal messages from Aerostar teams pledging support. She responded to none of them, not yet. Instead, she read one quiet message from her father. "Dad, they saw you. Eden, the real you. You did good." The screen blurred for a moment. She blinked the tears back. A knock on her door broke the quiet. Rowan stepped in, holding a slim folder. Preliminary audit reports just came in. "You were right," he said. "It wasn't just your ticket. They've downgraded dozens over the past year, disproportionately targeting people of color, especially black women." Eden felt the air shift. "What do we do?" she asked softly. Rowan sat beside her, voice low. "We make it impossible for them to ignore this." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Miami skyline in fire and gold, Eden Blake knew this was no longer about a single flight. This was a reckoning. At 7:12 a.m. the following morning, Eden Blake stood at the edge of a long, lacquered conference table in Venturo Air's regional headquarters just outside Miami. The boardroom windows faced east, allowing a golden sheet of sunrise to creep across the glass table. Across from her sat the airline's interim CEO, Chandler Whitaker, flanked by legal counsel, communications heads, and a newly pale-faced William Knox. On his right, Rebecca Lynn silently thumbed through a printed dossier Eden's team had provided moments earlier. Eden placed both hands on the table. "I'm not here to perform," she began, voice level but firm. "I'm here to show you how deep this rot goes." The screen behind her lit up with digital slides, time-stamped logs, flight roster overrides, behavior trend reports from internal whistleblowers. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. This isn't about one seat. This is about an internal culture that prioritizes plausible deniability over responsibility. And I have 47 cases in just 14 months of deliberate class reassignments tied to passengers of color. Knox opened his mouth, but Chandler cut him off with a raised hand. "Let her finish." Eden continued, her poise unshaken. 3 of those passengers filed formal complaints. None received follow-up. One woman was breastfeeding and seated in a non-reclining seat next to a lavatory. Another was separated from her autistic child. All had confirmed first-class seats. All were reassigned under equipment changes. She advanced the slides, and each override was logged under the same internal credentials. A soft gasp echoed. Rebecca's hand stilled on the printed page. "Knox, that's your badge number." The room turned. Knox flushed, but recovered quickly. It was standard procedure. Sometimes manual overrides are required to balance load or crew seating. This is all circumstantial." Eden stepped closer. "Then explain this." She tapped again. An audio file played. A gravel-voiced recording filled the space. "Let her taste what the rest of us endure." The voice was unmistakably his. Knox's chair shifted back slightly. Chandler pinched the bridge of his nose. Eden didn't blink. Your employee didn't just override a manifest. He tried to make a point. And now I'm making mine. Later that day, back in her Miami office, Eden sat in a quiet corner reviewing responses from her FAA and SEC contacts. Her legal team, led by Rowan Quinn, had uploaded the full packet of documentation from the prior 24 hours. Thomas had done his job. Now it was her turn to do something harder. Choose how far to take this. "You okay?" Rowan asked, appearing in the doorway with 2 coffees. She accepted one with a quiet thanks, but didn't sip. "Rowan, you've known me a long time. I have. If I push this, if I take it all the way, I'll become the face of another corporate takedown, a divisive figure. People will stop talking about what they did and start asking what I'm doing." Rowan sat across from her, folding his hands. "You're not being divisive. You're being direct. There's a difference." Eden sighed, leaning back. "I didn't ask for this." "No," Rowan replied, "but maybe this moment asked for you." By midday, Eden was seated across from an SEC liaison and FAA deputy investigator in a quiet side room of the Miami federal office. She laid out everything, calmly, meticulously, without spectacle. The investigator, a seasoned woman named Carmen Ellison, took careful notes. "I've worked aviation oversight for 18 years, she said after Eden finished. "I've seen mechanical cover-ups, money laundering, but culture manipulation? That's harder, more invisible." Eden nodded. "That's why I kept the boarding pass. That paper torn and useless was the first visible fracture." Ellison smiled faintly. "You kept the receipt, and now the airline's going to pay." Back at Venturo Air HQ, Chandler paced the floor of his private office. The internal report from Eden's presentation was damning, and now a dozen journalists had already requested comment. "Rebecca," he said, pausing by the window, "what happens if we cooperate fully?" She looked up from her laptop. "We lose control of the narrative, but we might keep the company." He turned. "And if we fight?" She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "Then we lose both." That evening, Eden sat alone in her hotel suite, city lights glittering across Biscayne Bay. She hadn't turned on the news. She didn't need to. The world was watching now. Her phone buzzed another message from her father. "I know you're tired, but remember, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing up while your legs are still shaking." She closed her eyes and let the quiet hold her for a moment longer. The pressure was immense, the path forward uncertain, but she wasn't walking it alone anymore. The media room at Aerostar's Miami satellite campus was packed wall to wall. Microphones crowded the podium, journalists hunched over live feeds. Industry executives watched from streaming dashboards. Everyone knew the press conference wasn't just a statement, it was a turning point. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Eden Blake stepped into the spotlight, flanked by Rowan Quinn, her legal chief, and Dr. Naomi Kerr, a newly appointed external safety consultant. Her navy blazer fit like armor. Her posture carried the burden of facts no one wanted to confront. She didn't speak right away. The silence was intentional. "Then my name is Eden Blake. I'm the CEO of Aerostar Global. 2 days ago, I was reassigned from a confirmed first-class seat under the pretext of an equipment change. What followed was a systematic campaign of humiliation, cover-ups, and silence. She paused. But this isn't about me. Click, flash, a dozen shutters fired. This is about what happens when an airline allows bias to masquerade as a protocol. It's about what gets buried under codes, maintenance logs, and override flags, and it's about why silence, especially from leadership, is complicity. The screen behind her lit up, an image the torn boarding pass from Flight 227. This, she said softly, wasn't just paper. It was a message you don't belong. Eden's voice didn't crack, but a few in the crowd felt their chests tighten anyway. I'm here to say I do belong. We all do. Across town, in Venturo Air's executive tower, a room full of board members watched the live stream. Chandler Whitaker sat at the head of the conference table, fingers steepled. Rebecca Lynn scribbled legal notes beside him. William Knox stared blankly at the floor. Has the FAA responded? Chandler asked. Rebecca nodded once. Their audit team arrives in 48 hours. They've demanded full access to flight manifest overrides and all related personnel files, and the SEC. They're coordinating whistleblower protection with Aerostar's team. Knox finally spoke. She's blowing this out of proportion. Chandler's voice was low. She's revealing what you buried. Knox's face turned crimson. Rebecca added, We've confirmed that your override wasn't an isolated incident. There was no hiding now. Back at the press conference, Eden continued. When I opened an inquiry into my own reassignment, my team uncovered nearly 50 similar cases in just over a year. 48 of those involved people of color. 9 were business travelers with platinum or executive status. None received official apologies. Reporters murmured, fingers flying across keyboards. I've spoken with federal regulators. We've submitted every log, voice memo, and badge ID tied to this misconduct. Rowan stepped forward, unrolling a copy of the audit request filed with the FAA and SEC. Eden let the weight of her words settle in. This is not a vendetta, it's accountability. Later that afternoon, Mason Chen, the young boy from Economy, plus watched Eden's speech replayed on a tablet in his living room. His father, David Chen, looked over his shoulder. She didn't raise her voice once, he said, voice full of quiet pride. Mason nodded, but she made everyone listen. By evening, Eden sat in a quiet lounge near the Miami airport, still in her press attire. The adrenaline had worn off, replaced with something slower, heavier. The aftermath always arrived silently. Rowan Quinn joined her at the table, handing over a ginger tea. We've already received early statements of support from 3 other major carriers, he said. They're watching Venturo now carefully. Good, Eden murmured. They should. But she didn't smile. Instead, she looked out the window at the string of grounded aircraft bathed in golden twilight. What if I lose control of the message she asked? What if this becomes about politics and not people? Rowan leaned forward. Then remind them, again and again. If you have to, truth always needs a translator. Eden's fingers traced the edge of her tea glass. I didn't want to be that translator, she said. Rowan nodded. I know, but the story chose you. The glass walls of Venturo Air's executive boardroom looked out over the Miami skyline. But no one inside noticed the view. The only thing reflected in their eyes was fallout. Eden Blake's morning press conference had shattered the polished calm of their tower. What remained was splintered trust, legal panic, and a bitter reckoning they could no longer postpone. At the head of the table, Chandler Whitaker opened the meeting with 6 clipped words. "We are not surviving this quietly." Beside him, Rebecca Lynn handed out packets printouts of system logs, voice memos, FAA letters of inquiry, internal emails flagged by Aerostar's whistleblower team. The evidence was no longer deniable. Across the room, William Knox looked like a man who hadn't slept in 2 days. His arrogance had curdled into something sourer dread. "Eden's trying to destroy us," he snapped, voice hoarse. "She wants to own the narrative, paint us as relics. She doesn't have to try," Chandler replied evenly. We handed her the brush. Downstairs, the lobby buzzed with uncharacteristic unease. Employees whispered over coffee, heads bent over phones on the screens near the elevators. Muted news anchors broke down the unfolding scandal in split screens, Eden's speech, FAA updates, and a flashing headline, "Breaking ESIC opens inquiry into Venturo Air's passenger handling safety culture." At HR, administrative assistants scrolled through emails, voluntary resignation policies, legal contact instructions, mandatory compliance retrainings. The silence in the building had become oppressive. Upstairs, the boardroom discussion turned. "Carl's name is on half these logs," said Rebecca Lynn, her voice low but firm. "And William. You approved his override access months ago, without secondary review." William's jaw clenched. "You don't think he acted alone?" "Do you?" she asked pointedly. Chandler stood, walking slowly to the windows. He didn't need to act alone. Chandler said, "The system enabled him, and we let it." There it was, the first admission, mid-afternoon, across town. Eden sat on a quiet bench outside her Miami hotel. She had stepped away from her legal team for 15 minutes of air. On her phone, she watched a clip of William Knox being approached by reporters outside Venturo's garage exit. He said nothing, face unreadable as flashes popped. Her thumbs hovered over the screen. The cost of speaking up was always steep. It cost time, sleep, favor, and comfort. But silence had always cost her more. Her thoughts wandered to a version of herself years ago, fresh out of business school, trying to prove herself in boardrooms where she was the diversity candidate, not the expert. Those days left wounds too deep to be erased. But maybe, finally, she was helping others skip the bleeding. A quiet voice pulled her from reverie. "Ms. Blake." It was Mason Chen, notebook in hand, his father standing a few feet behind with a warm, proud smile. Eden blinked in surprise. "I just wanted to say," Mason began shyly, "my teacher showed your story in class today." Everyone clapped. Eden's eyes softened. "I'm not used to clapping," she said with a smile, "but thank you. Mason, I want to be like you when I grow up." Her chest tightened, not from pride, but from gravity. "Then be better," she replied. "Be brave, but kinder, and don't let the world tell you where you belong." He nodded. "Okay." Back at Venturo HQ, the final blow fell. The board voted. Chandler stood, clearing his throat. Effective immediately, William Knox is removed from all leadership and operational decision-making. His role is suspended, pending further legal review and federal cooperation. The room was silent. William didn't argue. He just rose slowly, adjusted his jacket, and walked out without a word. The door clicked behind him, a soft sound that felt like thunder. Late that night, Eden sat in her hotel room, lit only by the glow of her laptop. Her inbox was overflowing messages from civil rights organizations, employee unions, airline CEOs, exhausted passengers who had seen themselves in her story. But one message stood out. Subject line: accountability begins tomorrow. Let's talk. It was from Chandler Whitaker, attached a formal request for a closed-door meeting between Aerostar and Ventro's board. She stared at the screen, then clicked reply. I'll be there. Bring your honesty. I'll bring the truth. Eden. 3 weeks later, the headquarters of Venturo Air was no longer just an office. It was a construction zone for walls and for culture. The boardroom where silence once suffocated now echoed with difficult conversations. New posters lined the hallways. Accountability is fuel. Respect isn't an upgrade. It's the runway. Employees were encouraged to speak freely. Anonymous reporting platforms had been launched. Entire departments were being restructured. At the heart of it all stood Eden Blake. The final meeting between Aerostar Global and Venturo Air's board was held on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. No press, no cameras, just truth. Chandler Whitaker opened with a handshake, not performative, but sincere. "We've read your proposal," he said. "We accept the terms." Eden glanced at Rowan Quinn, her chief legal officer, who gave a slight nod. Then, let's begin. The documents were long, detailed, and merciless in their clarity. A third-party ethics and compliance panel. FAA reporting channels directly linked to a joint oversight board. Leadership retraining requirements, and a complete audit of override systems. And most notably, a clause Eden herself had insisted on employee amnesty and equity bonuses for any staff who came forward during the internal investigation. This, she said quietly, isn't punishment. It's prevention. We aren't here to shame Venturo. We're here to help it survive with its soul intact. There was silence. Then Chandler spoke. "You've done more than anyone ever did in 30 years. "No," Eden replied. "I just didn't leave the room when it got uncomfortable. That night." Eden returned to her suite at the Intercontinental. The storm outside beat against the windows like a metronome, thunder in sync with the weight in her chest. On the coffee table was a small envelope. Her assistant had slipped it under her door with a note. "Found in the mailroom. Thought you'd want to see this one." She opened it. Inside was a short letter. "Dear Ms. Blake, my name is Amira Holloway. I'm 14 years old, and I want to be a pilot one day. My mom told me what you did on that plane. My teacher told us that courage doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's quiet and smart and still scary. Anyway, I wanted to say thank you. If I ever get told I don't belong in the cockpit, I'll remember what you said. You didn't scream. You just changed everything. Love. Amira." Eden pressed the letter to her chest and exhaled. Weeks later, the first Aerostar Venturo co-branded aircraft lifted off from San Diego en route to Boston. Painted across the body, beneath the logos, were 3 simple words: "We fly with integrity." That flight marked more than a merger. It was a signal to the industry, to passengers, to employees from every rung that change had altitude. That day, Eden visited Mason Chen's school as a surprise guest speaker. She didn't talk about boardrooms or SEC investigations. She talked about the first time she ever flew. as a child watching clouds dissolve beneath her. She talked about fear, about being underestimated, about the difference between making noise and making change. She ended with a line that lingered long after she left the auditorium. The sky will always belong to those who remember where the ground is. Later that night, Aiden returned to her home in Manhattan. Her Mont Blanc pen rested beside her bedside journal. On the cover, etched in gold foil, were the words, "Power doesn't always speak first, but it always speaks last." She opened the journal and wrote just one line. "Respect is not a seat assignment. It's a right, and I will keep proving that until I no longer have to." She closed the book, reached for the lamp, and turned off the light. Outside, the city pulsed as always, but somewhere, in a new airplane cruising above the clouds, a little girl named Amira watched the cabin lights dim and believed for the first time that the sky was hers, too. Some stories end in victory, others end in understanding. This one ends in both. What began as a seat denial became a reckoning for an entire industry. Eden Blake didn't just fight for herself, she fought for every person who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told to take what you're given. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She made a single call and reminded the world that dignity is not optional. But let's not forget the boarding pass torn in half was more than paper. It was a symbol of how systems tear down people every day. We must ask, how many times has this happened in silence? This isn't just Eden's story. It's a reflection of what so many still face in the air, in offices, in life. And if this moved you, if it made you angry, made you proud, made you hope, then join us, because more stories are coming. And every story we tell is one more step toward justice. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for stories that don't just inspire, but ignite. Until next time, stay grounded in truth and always rise.